Hi, I'm Jeff Sharon from UCF Sports Night. You can now watch UCF TV 24 hours a day on Bright House Digital Channel 1.
Hello and welcome to Public Affairs Today. I'm Alicia Callanan Mandigo. This show is designed to introduce you to public affairs, which is a much more dynamic field than you may realize. On the table today is Mongolia, a world away from us geographically, economically, and socially. With me today is Professor Lawrence Martin from UCF's Department of Public Administration. Welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, delighted to be here.
Yeah, you know, this is to me a really fascinating subject, and what you've been doing in Mongolia is trying to help them sort through some rather pressing social problems that they have there. But at the same time, it's interesting to me, there have to be people that are out there thinking, well, we have enough of our own problems, why should we care about Mongolia? So let's start with that. Why should we care?
Okay, good question from a public policy perspective. It's an emerging democracy, and that seems to be something that our country ought to be supporting. It was under Soviet domination. It was a communist centralized government for about 70 years. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, it has moved to a market economy and to a more open society, more democratic elections. So it's something that we should be interested in, we should be supporting. And it's an interesting buffer state in that it lies nestled between Russia and China, so it has geopolitical implications.
Mm-hmm. It's a very, very old country, and we were joking last week that for a lot of us, the sum total of our knowledge of Mongolia is Genghis Khan, which we don't even say his name correctly.
Yeah, one of the first things that Mongolians will do to people who visit the country is correct you. It's Genghis Khan, and evidently Westerners have been mispronouncing it for hundreds of years.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the basic society. This is a country that has largely been a nomadic society. You know, as you mentioned, they're starting to be an emerging economy. One of the things that they're doing is they're trying to exploit, well, I shouldn't use the word exploit. They're trying to develop tourism around what is their traditional society, which is very interesting. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that and then talk about the migration into their one significant urban center.
Well, sure. Historically, the country's economy has been based almost exclusively on herding, with some mining, some extraction, metals. They've been trying to expand their economy, and one of the things that they're really pushing hard for is more tourism. There's a lot of great hunting and fishing. It's a very beautiful, stark but very beautiful landscape when you get outside of the cities. If you're kind of a rugged individual and you like to go out and camp and backpack and ride your bikes and what have you, a very interesting place to visit. And since they don't have a lot of, the word I'm coming up with is abilities, but that's not what I want to say. They don't have a lot of inherent economic advantages, so they're trying to find a few things that will work for them. And right now they're hanging their hat on tourism.
Mm-hmm. But is tourism working for them? Because I have a friend that visited Mongolia as a tourist, and one of the things that she talked about that really struck me was that you can approach help me again, the tents are called?
Gers.
And that's what they live in, and that's how they travel about. And you can just go to anyone's and they will welcome you and feed you and treat you well.
Yeah, they're very open people, very accommodating, not standoffish to strangers in that sense. Again, the Gers are a form of housing. They can be put up and taken down in like 2 hours. So they move them around, they can put them wherever they need them. So, and they have very nicely decorated, very colorful gers that they use in their tourist areas. So it's a fun experience to spend a couple of nights in one of them.
Now, is it fair to say that Mongolia is a country of sharply contrasting images? We have some visual aids today. I have a couple pictures of the urban centers, and I was interested in what you had mentioned in looking at these pictures. Tell me about these pictures.
Well, the first picture is of the Mongolian parliament, and it's a classic Soviet-era style government building, on massive architecture. Since the Soviet Union was one of their major sources of foreign aid for a number of years, they tended to adopt Soviet-style architecture. So that's a good reflection of it. The other picture that we have here of this kind of donkey cart going through one of the streets is an example of the infrastructure problems in the urban area. We're going to talk about this in migration, but it's really taxing government infrastructure, roads, bridges, electricity, sewer, water, as well as social services.
But this is, you described this as being stark.
Yes, it is stark.
And that is in sharp contrast to the areas in which the nomads live.
Right. Stark is a term that I use to describe Mongolia in general, but the city is starkly drab. That is because all of the buildings have the same architecture, all built during the same period, and quite candidly, they're in a state of disarray and degradation at the present time. The countryside, however, is just miles and miles and miles of open spaces, grasslands, rolling hills, spotted ever so often by one of these gers, and then the herders' animals in the surrounding area, and they'll stay there until they've grazed that area sufficiently, and then they move on because they don't want to overgraze and kill off the grasses.
So we have an estimated population of 3 million in Mongolia, and it's also estimated that a third of those people live in the one city center of Ulaanbaatar.
Well, you pronounced it correctly. Good.
Oh, well, thank you. I can only begin to imagine the types of social problems that has created. You've mentioned a few. They don't have infrastructure to support people. They don't have the social services to support people. They have a tremendous problem with homeless children. Yes. Let's talk a bit about that.
Well, back 20 years ago, when it was still a Soviet-style government, communist government, the people weren't free to choose either their occupations or where they lived. The government said, you will live out in this particular rural area and you will be part of a herding commune, and that was their lifestyle choices. With the change from a communist government to a more democratic government, two things occurred, or many things occurred, but two important things that occurred was, one, people are now allowed to live wherever they want to and to choose their own professions. And particularly the young people, and there are a lot of young people in Mongolia because it's a very young society. They have access to television, they know what's going on in the world, and they don't want to be herders. So they're moving into the city, essentially picking up their gers, tearing them down in 2 hours, moving into the city and erecting them in what the outskirts of Ulaanbaatar. So you have these humongously large areas of concentrations of gers with very little public or private sanitation. Electricity is very spotty, no roads to speak of at all, they're just dirt paths, and a lot of no jobs. Mm-hmm. So a lot of social problems associated with that, including child and spousal abuse, alcoholism, and one of the reasons that I have been going to Mongolia is I've been working with the Ministry of Labor and Social Welfare and an organization called Save the Children out of the United Kingdom, a large international non-profit child welfare agency, trying to do something about the street children. Families, because they have no income now, can't take care of their children, so they're essentially just turning them loose on the streets and disowning them.
Okay, so there may be people who don't really understand the significance of what that means. Street children not only end up begging, they are exposed to being exploited. They can end up as child laborers, or perhaps worse, they can end up as slaves. I would have to think that there are now disease problems in Ulaanbaatar that didn't exist before, because when you have a concentrated population that you can't support infrastructure-wise, that's just one of the things that happens. What are you guys seeing there?
Well, I personally have not seen a lot of disease per se, and that may be a function of the fact that it's so cold there. For 9-10 months out of the year, the average temperature, not the average temperature, but the temperature can get down to as low as 40 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. So that maybe kills off a lot of the germs. But yeah, you see kids begging on the streets, and you know some of them are being exploited. Street children may be one of their biggest social problems. And unfortunately, well, how they survive the winter is that they go down into the sewers. They take the manhole covers off, they go down there, there's some steam pipes, it's warm. So the government's solution to homeless children was to well shut the entrances to the sewers. So
okay.
International child welfare organizations are trying to get the government to adopt some more enlightened approaches to child welfare.
They made sure the sewers were clear before they did that, didn't they?
I hope so. I sincerely hope so.
Oh my God. Okay, so what are some of the immediate solutions that are being looked at, and what are some of the longer term solutions?
Well, in terms of the immediate solutions, a lot of the progress that's being made in Mongolia, I think, is a direct result of NGOs, non-governmental organizations, along with a lot of foreign aid from the European Union, from the United States, from the UN Development Fund, these types of organizations coming in and trying to create a semblance of a nonprofit sector. You have to remember, prior to 20 years ago, there was no private sector at all. Everybody worked for the government. And the way that they've tried to create a private sector is they will tell, let's say, a hotel, which has been operated as a co-op. Okay, tomorrow you're now no longer a government co-op, you're a private sector co-op. So they have to try to find their own resources, attract their own personnel and income and what have you, and try to make it. 80% of the people in Mongolia in the urban areas of Mongolia supposedly are in the services industry. Don't know exactly how to describe that, but a lot of small individual businesses springing up, and a lot of small Mongolian owned and oriented non-governmental organizations being created by these international NGOs. So they're essentially trying to create a private sector where there was no private sector before.
Okay, so we would be talking then about street vendors, maybe people that are developing some sort of a craft, like
restaurants, nightclubs. They're a very fun-loving people because they're very young society. So yeah, just a lot of what we might call mom and pop operations. And the Mongolians are very fiercely independent, kind of, again, I said earlier, they remind me a lot of the American Old West, the American cowboy. Very independent, bootstraps. They're gonna pick themselves up and do their own thing, and I think be successful at it. But it's going to take a while.
Do you think that tourism is a viable avenue for them?
I seriously question that. I think Mongolia appeals to a certain type of person looking for that unusual vacation spot. I mean, we hear stories of people taking a boat trip down the Amazon and things. Doesn't necessarily appeal to me, but it does appeal to a certain type of person. I have run into people from all over the world backpacking and hiking through Mongolia, and they seem to love it. It's not going to be a solution to long-term solution to employment solution for the bulk of the Mongolians, however.
Okay, well, we're going to take a short break right now. And when we come back, we can pick up that conversation about what might be some long-term solutions for them. You are watching Public Affairs Today, and we're discussing Mongolia with Professor Lawrence Martin. We'll be right back. We're back with Professor Lawrence Martin, and we're discussing Mongolia, which in the course of the past 20 years has developed some rather significant social problems, and he has been doing some work trying to help Mongolia examine some of those social problems and potential solutions. We were talking about tourism and whether that was a viable source of sustainable income for Mongolia. We have a few pictures here. We have some visual aids. This is, in terms of one of the tourist attractions, if you will, the really big festival that they hold each year in Mongolia. I believe it's called the Nadam Games.
I think that's right, yes.
Okay, and the translation that I found is, these are 3 manly contests. So they are very manly. They have the wrestling, archery, and then the horse race that I think is of a significant distance. Tell me a little bit about the fact that this festival is 1,000 years old, they estimate. It's now attracting tourists. It's the biggest event of the year in Mongolia. Tell us a little bit about what this says about Mongolia, the festival.
Well, they're simply honoring their heritage. They are a nomadic people, a horse people, great horsemen. In fact, that's how they earned their worldwide reputation. One of the reasons that the Chinese built the Great Wall to keep the Mongolians out.
They were trying to keep this guy out, right?
Yes, Genghis Khan. Yes, that's on a hill outside of Ulaanbaatar.
Mm-hmm. So he's still very significant.
He is their founding father almost. I mean, he's revered in much the same way that we revere George Washington. Mm-hmm. And they take a lot of pride in him. If you go to the souvenir shops, everything is devoted to him, and everything's made out of horsehide because that's a plentiful supply.
Okay. All right, so historically speaking, was the nomadic lifestyle a sustainable lifestyle for Mongolians?
Well, I think the answer to that is yes. I mean, because they survived for 1,000 years. It's a very basic subsistence lifestyle, but it is sustainable. However, now that so many Mongolians are moving into the city, that, in my estimation, is in its current situation is not sustainable. You just don't move overnight from a herding society to a semi-industrial society. I mean, all the countries of the world have gone through this. Well, the countries of the world that have gone through this have all gone through it painfully. Mm-hmm. And I think the Mongolians will have many years of pain ahead of them. But again, they're very stoic people. You know, one of the things that really strikes me about the Mongolian people is they're happy for what they have, rather than being disenchanted for what they don't have. Okay. You know, they all have TVs, they all know what goes on in the world, they all know that other countries have a higher living standard, but I've never heard them complain about that. You know, they want to move forward, they want to have a better life, and but essentially they want to do it themselves.
We were talking earlier, and you were mentioning that Mongolia is a country of limited resources. They don't have any agriculture. They are able to raise livestock easily, I guess. They have some mining. Yes. and that's it. So then how do you create sustainability?
Well, that's a good question. There are a lot of organizations, the UN and USAID, Agency for International Development, in there trying to find how Mongolia can be a niche player in the world economy. They have a very young workforce, a very motivated workforce, unfortunately not a very highly educated workforce. It would seem to me that some form of manufacturing might possibly be in their future. But then you have the problem of Mongolia being a landlocked country. You can't bring a ship and park it next to the dock. You can't run a railroad in. The only way to bring goods in and out are via air, and that's, as we all know, is very expensive. However, they've endured for 1,000 years. I assume they're going to endure for at least a few more years.
See, I've been wondering about that myself, because that does seem to be one of the consistent solutions when you're talking about an up-and-coming economy. Well, let's go down there and build some factories, and we'll teach people how to sew, and they'll make shirts, and we'll sell them, and then everybody will have a sustainable income. And I always have a little bit of trouble with that, because first of all, you're talking about very low-level, low-paying jobs. So you're not, while they may be able to bring home money, which I guess you can argue is sustainability, to me it's not sustainability because it doesn't allow for any growth. Secondly, there's the whole sweatshop issue. There's no protecting people from that. And so I would imagine that that would be the situation in Mongolia.
Very well could be. Again, the fact that there's been an absence of a private sector, they just don't have a lot of institutional safeguards that many countries would have. For instance, corporate governance laws and laws about and regulations about commerce. These are all having to be created. Fortunately, there's a lot of organizations in there helping them do it, but long-term sustainability, it's an open question. Short-term, they're going to rely on foreign aid for a significant proportion of their economic wherewithal.
20 years is plenty of time for a newly free society to get itself in trouble, but it's not a lot of time for a newly free society to get its act together.
Couldn't have said it better, yeah.
Have we seen, what have we seen in other countries where they face the same dilemma? And I mean, 20 years, it's just enough time to hang yourself.
Well, I mean, we might immediately think of the Eastern European countries, the former countries that were under the Soviet bloc, but they weren't herding societies. Nothing readily comes to my mind. I mean, you know, India is a mature economy, China's becoming a mature economy. Where would you have to go in the world to find a landlocked herding society trying to transition to a modern, free market-based economy? It's a tough one.
You told me that you sort of fell into this, that Mongolia was not originally an area of interest for you.
No, it wasn't. I used to teach at Columbia University, School of Social Work, and I had I had about a dozen students over a period of about 6 or 7 years from Mongolia, funded by the Open Society, George Soros's foundation. And one of the things that he's been trying to do, and the Open Society Foundation's been trying to do, is build the nonprofit sector in countries that are transitioning from communism to capitalism. He believes that that is the safeguard, the best way to ensure that these countries won't go through the kind of robber baron approach that happened in Russia. So they've now been back in their own country for some of them 10 years, and they're starting to work their way up in the government bureaucracies. So they've invited me over on a number of occasions to work with them in various capacities. Either, well, one year I taught social work, basic social work administration to a group of professors. And then other times I worked with NGOs, and the last time was actually trying to develop a set of policies and procedures for the Ministry of Social Welfare and Labor to partner with non-governmental organizations to address some of the social problems, in particular street children. Mm-hmm. Everything's been done by the government, everybody worked for the government, so they lack the tools, the orientation to do things differently.
Do you have days when you're just stymied and you think, I shouldn't have taken this on because I just don't know which way to go with it?
No, that's never, I've never felt that way. I guess I just, the Mongolians are such warm, caring, hardworking people that I just believe that they're going to work their way through this.
Mm-hmm. What's your most immediate concern with the street children? Because as a parent, that's the part that always scares me. I spent a little time in South America. Street children are a problem there, and it's just, there are no easy solutions to that, because you can't easily round them up and put them in orphanages, and even if you do, once they become street children, they're not willing to be governed, so to speak. How do you fix that?
Well, I'm not sure that you can fix the children who are already on the street. I mean, you can alleviate their situation and try to put them into some sort of shelter and what have you. But I think the long-term strategy that the Mongolians are adopting is to work with families and to provide supports and what we might call kind of daycare, recreation facilities, so they can, the children can get out of the gears, mm-hmm. Give mom and dad a break. They can go somewhere safe. They can get a hot meal, and maybe that'll take some of the stress off of the families.
So it's prevention. It's not fixing the problem that is already in place.
No, I would say that they're more. The government is more oriented towards prevention at the moment, leaving the current situation to the NGOs, the non-governmental organizations, and principally the international NGOs.
Okay, great. Well, I'm afraid we're out of time. We would love to have you back, because I know there's a lot more to learn, and I always have more questions. So thank you very much for joining us today. Again, we have been talking with Professor Lawrence Martin from the Department of Public Administration, and the topic on the table today was Mongolia. That's going to do it for now. I'm Alicia Callanan Mandigo, and thanks for watching Public Affairs Today.